Hello! I'm really excited about this topic. This is at the heart of the work that I do for myself and people that I work with. This is core beliefs and shadow work, which are like the two favorite things. And I want to preface this for people watching who do DNRS because I'm a coach and I work with a lot of people who do DNRS, and I've walked with people. That's my path. That's what I do, or that's what I've done so far. I will work with people who don't do DNRS at some point, but for those of you who do, who are doing DNRS, understand that this is intermediate level. So from where I stand now, and I can't speak for where I will be in the future because the farther I go, the more I see the truth of this. But there's basic limbic stuff, which is what DNRS addresses mostly. That's about the first, 6 months, maybe year of rewiring is like basic limbic foods, movement, pops around, the things they're training on, chemicals, blah, 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 all that stuff. That's basic limbic stuff. This is intermediate level. Once you finish that, because it's like peeling layers of an onion, you get all that stuff gone, you come to a place where you're rewiring your ways of being, your core beliefs, and how you show up in life. Because all of the limbic stuff that led to that, all of the patterns that led to that most blatantly limbic stuff come from patterns you had. So in every way, like the way that you do relationships, the way that you, like the deepest beliefs inside of you that you just have never been aware of, are the things that created that limbic storm. So that this is intermediate level. So you have the basic limbic stuff, then you have, actually looking at, once all that's cleared off and you can see past it, your vision's not being clouded by basic limbic stuff anymore. You can see, oh my gosh, like, look at the way I respond to the people in my life. Look at how I think about my body every day as I'm eating and getting dressed, or look at what I believe about work and money and like all these, so kind of the way you operate in relationship to life in general. That's the second one. That's the second layer. The third layer is taking all of those core beliefs, and it's like you cleaned your car, what do they call that? There's a name for it. Like you kind of redid the engine. You've got it, everything's running, everything's shipshape, but then you take it out on the road. And it's not till you take it out on the road that you really find, where you need to reinforce things, where things need to be tweaked, and just overall gain the strength and the transformation that comes from living out your beliefs in your life. So that's the third level of this. This is, as far as I've gotten, this is what I can see. Basic, limbic, intermediary, and then taking it out on the road and actually living it out every single day and letting that change you. So this is the intermediate stage. So if you are starting DNRs, if you're in your first 6 months, this is not for you. This is going to be confusing because I see a lot of people who think that their core beliefs are like their pops around, basic limbic stuff like chemicals and clothing and movement and, food and all that. It's like that has nothing to do with your core beliefs. So just for clarity. Okay, so the good stuff. The first step to doing this is sitting down with yourself. And a lot of times what will happen is you'll kind of have a situation where you end up feeling triggered afterwards. And this usually, again, only happens once you've cleared away some of the basic stuff. And for someone who's not doing DNRS, this may just be a particular relationship or an activity or something you do where you're like, I always feel kind of crappy after I do that. Like, I don't feel good about myself, or I feel upset, or I feel a little anxious or a little depressed. Some form of not good, overtired, drained. I get a migraine when I talk to these people, like whatever. You're something inside of you is kind of like afterwards, or even during. Or something's just not working for you. Like you're trying and you're like, I'm doing all the things. Why isn't this working? And usually there's a core belief getting in the way. That's what I found overall. So a couple of personal examples to give some context. Before I started DNRS, and again, I'm Catholic and I'm now definitely straddle the line between being a spiritual and religious person. At this point though, this was how I lived my faith out. And I was talking to my husband one night and I was like, why hasn't God healed me? Like, I've asked for healing so many times. And my husband just looked at me and said, did you really believe he would? And I was like, no. I haven't been open to that. I have this belief that God wants me to suffer, and that's what I was operating in. And I realized that in that moment because I was so desperate. I was on my knees. I had been humbled. I was, on the ground, internally just desperate for something to change. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't. In that moment, I opened my heart up to God and I was like, please heal me. I trust that you actually want this for me. And it felt like I had to just bow myself down so low to be able to say that truly and authentically. But I did it. A month later, I found DNRS. And the rest is history. That was one example. Another one has been, and this has been ongoing, and like I've found deeper and deeper levels of it over time that have just blown my mind as to how deeply held this belief was. And I don't know where it comes from, and it doesn't matter. It never matters where the false belief comes from because you're not going to keep it, so it doesn't matter where it started. But as I rewired over my husband and having him not be a trigger and learning how to be my own person in my house and believe that I'm worthy of having my own life and understanding what it means to be human and that human beings are worthy of having their own life. In the context of a family, you choose the family and you're choosing it as a person who's making clear choices from a place of I am worthy and I am deserving of the good life has to offer, and I'm creating my life, I'm building my life, and I'm choosing every aspect of it. And my brain was so terrified to ever disagree with my husband, to do things that he does, didn't necessarily approve of, like this, a number of other things. And to continue to believe that, no, I'm worthy of being true to myself. I'm worthy of actually living my life that's coming from my heart and soul, where I feel alive and on fire and I have energy and I'm being myself. I feel vibrantly well and healthy and not limbic and sick. And because, as a person coming from recovery, as soon as you veer off the path of authenticity, you have physical or emotional or mental symptoms of some kind that are telling you, hey, you're not on the path anymore. So it's very important to me that I kept coming up against this and feeling triggered over and over, and it would deeper and deeper levels. And I was like, wow, some part of me believes that, like, some part of me was seeing my husband as like a god figure, which is absurd because I don't think that consciously whatsoever. But clearly that was happening because I was like terrified of what he was going to say or what he was going to do if I was actually myself, how much disapproving or whatever it is that he might, say to me, or the way he look at me, or what he might do or whatever. And it was all just fear. It was just fear. And it was like, no, like, I believe in God, and I believe what God has to say about me, not what my husband thinks about me. This is not about that. And this could apply to anybody. For a lot of people, this is your parents. A lot of times it's that, like, I need my mother's approval, or my father's approval, or my spouse's approval, or my boyfriend or girlfriend's approval. Sometimes even for, people with adult children, sometimes they want their kids' approval. But it's kind of always putting another human being's approval over God, or, depending on your beliefs, like your own true authentic self in your heart and soul, like that, putting someone else's approval over, am I being true to myself? That was huge. Like, it took a lot of, again, from what I've just said, like, it's absurd. It's really ridiculous when you actually put it out there. And so this is a great exercise to do when you're working on core beliefs, is to, when you see your behaviors, like, ask yourself, look at your behaviors and kind of say, like, what are my behaviors saying? What do they say I believe? Because this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm feeling when I do what I do. What does that say about what I believe? Ask yourself that. Be really brutally honest with yourself and write it down, because it looks so absurd when you write it down. It really helps you to get a clear perspective on, like, oh my, that is definitely not true. Because it's so easy to fall for the limbic system's, if it's what you've been believing your whole life, it's really easy to fall for that. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I forgot to keep my notes where they wouldn't turn off. So, and then the last one is really deeply rooted and it's very widespread across the culture at large. So it's kind of hard to root out because most people have these pops on some level. Beliefs about the opposite sex and or romantic relationships. Like, that our worth is somehow, and how our worth and our worthiness and the meaning of life and all of that. And ultimately, your worthiness as a human being has nothing to do with how the opposite sex views you. And that sounds very reasonable, but if you actually look at your behaviors and the way you relate to people of the opposite sex, whether they're, regardless of your state in life, it's quite amazing how much we can take other people's perspective of us and subconsciously, without realizing it, internalize it and think that it has something to do with who we are. Like, if, maybe you've had someone reject you, or maybe you have a lot of people who actually are really interested in you, or some combination of the two, or you've had historic problems with relationships of some kind, or patterns or whatever, and it's really easy to start to think that has something to do with who you are, or even that romantic relationships have anything to do with your happiness, because they don't. It's having, being true to yourself and living your purpose is the only thing that's going to make you happy. And if, certain kind of relationships are part of that, great. If not, great. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And I honestly can't even, I've rewired so much of this that I can't remember what they were, but I had so many things tied to my self-worth that had to do with the opposite sex, and it's taken a couple of years to dig it all out and rewire it, but I cannot tell you of freedom. But again, and when you write them down, it's like kind of absurd the things we believe in. So those are kind of my personal examples. Now, how to, because I want you to be able to walk away with something practical here. So once you find that true belief, you've got kind of write it down, or at least acknowledge it in your head. I highly recommend when you start, the first time you do this, write it down. Later on, if you're continuing, if this is a process you're in for a while, which I hope it is, because it's so worth it for the freedom that comes, it becomes intuitive. It's something you probably can do more internally, depending on your personality. But once you find the false belief, and you find the true belief, because again, a lot of times the true belief sounds very logical, and it can depend. Sometimes it's really obvious how stupid the old one is, and it's clear that the new one is. But a lot of times, the more logical one sounds more reasonable because it is more reasonable. But the thing to do is, once you've kind of got the false and the true belief, stop and look at it and think, okay, I know like your current pattern of behavior and emotion is aligned with the old belief. And with the new one, you're going to stop and say, okay, if I believe this new thing. So for me, for example, with my life and my husband and so on, it was like, okay, if I really believe that I'm worthy of living my own life, then I'm going to do things my way. And if he disagrees with how I want to parent our children or how I want to do, like, I will respectfully, have a conversation, but I'm not going to just immediately give in because he's right about everything and I'm wrong about everything. Like, or has the right to speak up, but I don't, or something like that, because that's what I used to operate in. And it's being like, no, I'm worthy of, like, my way of doing things is valid, and I can look at this logically and say, like, okay, whose is more valid, and where can we compromise? And even with myself saying, like, I choose to believe that I am worthy of being authentic to myself. I'm going to get tattoos that I want to get, or I'm going to pursue a career that I want to pursue along with the kids, and I'll work with my husband to figure that out. But kind of believing that I'm worthy of it and doing those things confidently. And when you really believe it, the difference is you do it calmly because you actually believe that you're worthy of it. Which is so different, because I could have done those things. And at the beginning, I mean, in acting into these new beliefs, there were periods of time where I really had to kind of beat down the anxiety that would come when I started acting in these new ways, because my brain was terrified of what was going to happen or what might happen because of the new ways I was acting. And that's where the work is noticing the patterns when you start acting in these new ways, and you notice those patterns, realize that if you firmly believe the new truth, you're going to do it calmly. And it's going to bring you joy to do the things that are truly authentic to you. That's how it's going to feel. So think about what does it feel like to really believe this new belief, and stop and just think about it and let yourself feel that in your whole body. Like, think for a moment of, like, how would I feel if I really believe I'm worthy of pursuing my dreams? And kind of be like, oh yeah, baby, like, yeah, that's awesome. And let that feeling kind of really sink in. And then the key is to stay in that emotion of the new belief that you want until it clicks. It is entirely, I mean, the limbic system is your emotional system. You just have to change the emotion and the thoughts will follow. This was something I wanted to even write down because it's so helpful. Your energetic state determines the quality of your thoughts. You don't have to try to change your thoughts. If you change your belief on an emotional level by embodying the emotion that's in line with the belief that you've chosen, the thoughts that, you will automatically generate thoughts that are in line with the new belief, because you're being there emotionally, and your energetic state is what determines the quality of your thoughts and what kind of thoughts you're having. So know that. And also, yes, this is really important. Once you pick that new belief and you start, and I really recommend only working on like one or two at a time. Give yourself time, because the brain can only handle so much change at a time. And these are big, it's like changing out massive hardware, it's like changing out massive hardware in your computer. It's not even software. It's really more like hardware. Like, it's a big change for your brain to replace these patterns. So only work on one or two at a time. And if you do this and you're really all in on embodying that new emotion 24/7, it takes about, in my experience, it takes about 2 months the first time you do it. After that, it can take less time. But I would say between a week and 2 months is to be expected for this to take a lot of mental and emotional focus, a lot of curious observer, You know, if you're doing DNRS, more rounds, lots of mood elevation to keep your brain calm. Elevating your mood is the thing that is the chill pill. Mood elevation is a chill pill. When you tell people like you need to find joy, find peace, find calm, find happiness, that's your chill pill. So make sure your brain is calm, because that's going to make it feel less threatened by the change. Because again, understand the brain finds change threatening. It finds massive change as threatening. So you have to kind of coddle and walk and hand hold your own brain as you go through this change. So, and just, again, I cannot emphasize how much, if you're going to do this, do it right the first time. Because it really, you can cause more cross wiring if you do it wrong. If you start it and then stop, then you kind of have two different beliefs running in your mind, and it just makes things really messy and confusing, and it's not a loving thing to do to yourself. So when you do this, just be clear about what you want. Go all the way through until it's in. Life will be so much easier when you get there, and sometimes to know that it can feel like you're reaching for something that's beyond reach, or like what you are trying to believe in sounds impossible. Like those are very common things. It looks like Mount Everest. Like those are very common things to feel when you start on a path of wiring a new core belief, depending on how big and like how much of an iceberg there was where the old belief was, like how much of big of a thing you're taking out. It can feel like you're reaching for something impossible. So know that those are all just false messages from your brain. They don't mean anything. That's part of the process. Just you can walk away from it because it's not real. Yeah, so just make sure you stay fully focused until it's done. Okay. I want to make sure we cover everything here. Okay, one practice that is, I cannot explain how important and vital this practice is to wiring a new core beliefs. Understand that all that you need for your life and all the beliefs that you need to have to succeed in fulfilling your purpose, they live inside of you, in your true self. And you'll be able to hear that self. It will become clear to you within yourself what the truth is when you bring yourself to a state of openness and clarity. And that's an energetic thing. So this is why when one of my, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, if you're friends with me on Facebook, you'll know I love dancing, and I post some of my videos because that practice for me has been the most healing, because it gets me to ground zero. When you just get yourself into a state where you're completely in tune with music and the energy's so clear from it, and you're just letting that energy move as it wants to through your body, you kind of, your brain's not part of that. You're tapping in entirely to your energetic self, like your true self. And there's just a sense of absolute flow. Like you are one with the river of energy. There is no thought, there is no self-consciousness, it's just you in your purest state. And that's where you're going to find the answers to all of your problems, to all of your questions. You're going to find the strength that you need to succeed in everything you put yourself towards in life. It all exists inside of you in that state. So, and it may not be dance for you. It may be something else. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's taking pictures of birds. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But make it a priority to spend at least an hour a day in that space in some form. It could just be meditation. Again, photography, anything that gets you into a really intense flow state where you're like, you almost don't have any awareness of anything but what you're doing. And even that awareness is almost kind of like, you're not even aware of your focus because you're so in the zone. I'm sure there's some name for that brain state. I don't know enough of the science to know that, but that's all that matters, is that you get yourself to that state, because it's like this childlike state. Children know they're worthy. They say, I'm the fastest runner. I'm the prettiest girl. I have, like, my daughter who's 4. She's like, I want to have prettier shirts than Mommy and Lucia and Aurelia and Grandma and and Nana. Like, she just wants to be the prettiest girl ever, and like older people that, we don't think we're worthy of like wanting to be that amazing, but children know they're worthy. And that's kind of what you're tapping into, is that flow state that we all inhabit naturally as kids. That is, again, this is your adventure. It's your ship you're sailing. Go to your own heart and soul, and it's going to show you the way. That practice, whatever it is that takes to get you there, utilize that every single day for at least an hour in this process, and you will find everything you're looking for within your own heart and soul. Okay, the last thing on this is to understand this can be really ugly work. I cannot tell you how many times I have been on my hands and knees on my bed, just grabbing onto the sheets and like groaning or hissing or growling, dancing, kind of using really violent, sharp movements because in order, like, you are literally, like, again, that iceberg analogy, like, you're removing something so big that your brain thought that was you, and you taking that out and replacing it with something else feels very foreign and threatening to your brain, and its protective mechanism will activate. And what you want to do is get that protective kind of animalistic part of you on your side in the process of change instead of working against you. You want to become the tiger, the panther, the warrior, the killer, the seductress, the whatever. You want to become and embody that really, really primal energy to accomplish your task, to accomplish changing this thing that you want to change and becoming the person you truly are. That is not pretty. My favorite opposite, as I've told, if you're one of my clients, I've told a lot of people this, my favorite opposite is fuck you, Limby. Because it's like, no, this is my brain and my life, and I am protecting what is sacred to me with every ounce of my strength and ferocity. So it's interesting because you want to tap into that flow state where you're a child, but it's also understanding that children can't defend themselves. So when you're living as that authentic self, you have to have a part of you that's trained, a trained fierce warrior to protect what is vulnerable, to protect your art, protect your soul. So, yes, growling, hissing, intuitive dance. I cannot wait until my core is strong enough to do martial arts. Any form of movement, getting outside, being really up and intimate with Mother Nature, in the dirt, watching the creeks and looking at birds and just being, climbing trees, laying in the dirt, as much as you can, get in touch with the animal inside of you, because you want that animal to be harnessed for your purposes and not working against you. Which, if you're not harnessing it, it will be working against you. Guaranteed. Because it's trying to protect you. So, just understand that as you do this, the process itself is very, very ugly. It can be. It is. It's ugly. The result is shining and clean and pure because you've purged it. But the purging process is, just imagine, like, you're basically like fighting with a panther with your bare hands. That's kind of what it's like. So just know that if it's ugly and you feel like you're being a bit erratic or not the person you want to be, understand that change is not pretty. That there's a quote I've seen a number of times that for a seed to germinate, like, it has to crack open and all the insides come out. And the quote is that, if you didn't know what change and transformation looks like, it would just look like you're coming completely undone. And that has been what it's looked like for me. But that's the only way. That's like kind of crossing that river of change, and it has to be gone through in order to get to this other side where you are a complete person who's integrated and you've made your choices, and your animalistic part of you is following behind. You've got the cart behind the horse and not the other way around. Because when we're limbic and when we're not being in accord with ourselves, it's like you're all these belief systems that you don't even understand, that you haven't looked at, are running your life without your permission. So the cart's in front of the horse and you're not in charge of your own life. So this is what it takes to get your life going in the way that you want to. And this is how you find success in life, is understanding that you have to be aligned. Every part of you has to be on board, or else you'll be splintered, you'll be split, and you will not succeed. So this stuff is just, it's the best. It's the best. It's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing to do. Like, it's my favorite thing to teach because it leads to so much freedom. There are no words. So yes, if you're looking for more freedom, the next level of growth, this stuff's where it's at. It's so good. So I hope this is helpful to those of you looking for additional resources. And much love to you, my friends.